Having taken part in the Battle of Morgoth and the Valar and having contributed to his master's evil plans by rebuilding the fortress of the destroyed Angband, Sauron has captured the elven tower of Minas Tirith. With his sorcery he has twisted this once fair land to a stronghold of evil and has now made himself the Lord of Tol Gaurhoth. While sitting in the tower of Minas Tirith, Sauron appoints his vampire messenger Thorin Wethil to carry out his errand between Tol Gaurhoth and Angband. Now in the years after the Dagor Bragollach, Morgoth's power is overshadowing the Northlands. Yet a man named Barahir, the father of Beren Erhamion and leader of the House of Beor, and his companions are unwilling to forsake the lands of Dorthonion. Unknowingly to the servants of Morgoth, these outlaws have made their lair beside the lake Tar Niluin, in the east of the highlands of that place. It is said that the waters of this lake had long ago been hallowed by Melian the Maya herself, and thus the enemy could not discover their hideout. When Morgoth hears of the deeds of these men, he commands Sauron to find and destroy them. Among Barahir's 12 companions is Gorlim the Unhappy. Gorlim's wife is named Elinel, and their evil befell, their love had been great. But upon returning from the war, Gorlim finds his house plundered and his dear wife gone. Nonetheless, doubt lies in his heart, thinking that Elinel is not dead, and at times he departs alone and secretly, visiting his house in the woods. This becomes known to the servants of Morgoth and to none other than Sauron himself. So one day when Gorlim comes to his house, Sauron deceives him with his sorcery with the purpose of discovering the whereabouts of the outlaws. On a time of autumn, he came in the dusk of evening, and drawing near, he saw as he thought a light at the window, and coming warily he looked within. There he saw Elinel, and her face was worn with grief and hunger, and it seemed to him that he heard her voice lamenting that he had forsaken her. But even as he cried aloud, the light was blown out in the wind. Wolves howled, and on his shoulders he felt suddenly the heavy hands of Sauron's hunters. Thus Gorlim was ensnared, and taking him to their camp they tormented him, seeking to learn the hidings of Barahir and all his ways. But nothing would Gorlim tell. Then they promised him that he should be released and restored to Elinel if he would yield. And being at last worn with pain and yearning for his wife, he faltered. Then straightway they brought him into the dreadful presence of Sauron. "I hear now that thou wouldst barter with me. What is thy price?" And Gorlim answered that he should find Elinel again and with her be set free, for he thought that Elinel also had been made captive. Then Sauron smiled. "That is a small price for so great a treachery. So shall it surely be. Say on." Now Gorlim would have drawn back, but daunted by the eyes of Sauron, he told at last all that he would know. Then Sauron laughed, and he mocked Gorlim and revealed to him that he had seen only a phantom devised by wizardry to entrap him, for Elinel was dead. "Nonetheless I will grant thy prayer, and thou shalt go to Elinel and be set free of my service." Then he put him cruelly to death. In this way the hiding of Barahir is revealed, and Morgoth draws his net about it. In the still hours before dawn, orcs are sent, and they surprise the men of Dorthonion and slay them all, save one. Beren had earlier been sent by his father Barahir on a perilous errand to spy upon the ways of the enemy. So upon the orcs' arrival to the haven of the outlaws, he is far afield and thus survives the assault. For the next 4 years Beren wanders upon Dorthonion as an outlaw, and his deeds are heard throughout Beleriand and reach the ears of Morgoth. Thereupon Sauron is ordered by his master to find and slay this man. At length Morgoth set a price upon his head, no less than the price upon the head of Fingon, High King of the Noldor, but the orcs fled rather at the rumor of his approach than sought him out. Therefore an army was sent against him under the command of Sauron, and Sauron brought werewolves, fell beasts inhabited by dreadful spirits that he had imprisoned in their bodies. But Sauron is unable to find Beren, and as the land of Dorthonion becomes now filled with evil, Beren eventually departs from it. 1 year later, in the autumn of the year 465, Finrod Felagund and Beren depart from Nargothrond with 10 companions in order to cut a silmaril from Morgoth's crown, so that Beren can win the hand of his beloved Lúthien in marriage. So as they approach the Eret Wethri in the Mountains of Shadow, they come upon a company of orcs. Upon slaying them, they take their gear, and by the magic of Finrod their forms are changed into the likeness of orcs. Yet as they approach Tolkien Gaurhoth, Sauron in his tower becomes aware of them, for the company travels in haste and they do not report their deeds to him, as Morgoth has commanded any of his servants who pass that way to do so. Therefore the group is captured and brought before Sauron himself. But the future Dark Lord is hindered by Finrod Felagund. Thus befell the contest of Sauron and Felagund, which is renowned, for Felagund strove with Sauron in songs of power, and the power of the king was very great, but Sauron had the mastery. Then Sauron stripped from them their disguise, and they stood before him naked and afraid. But though their kinds were revealed, Sauron could not discover their names or their purposes. He cast them therefore into a deep pit, dark and silent, and threatened to slay them cruelly unless one would betray the truth to him. From time to time they saw 2 eyes kindled in the dark, and a werewolf devoured one of the companions, but none betrayed their lord. In the end, King Finrod and Beren are the only ones who remain. In the pits of Sauron, Beren and Felagund lay, and all their companions were now dead. But Sauron purposed to keep Felagund to the last, for he perceived that he was an old of great might and wisdom, and he deemed that in him lay the secret of their errand. As the werewolf comes for Beren, Finrod bears his bonds and wrestles with the mighty beast, slaying it in the process. Yet in this act he is also wounded to the death. In this hour Lúthien arrives in Tolkien Gaurhoth with Huan, the Hound of Valinor, to rescue Beren from the Dungeons of Sauron. Standing upon the bridge that leads to Sauron's Isle, Lúthien sings a song of great power that no walls of stone can hinder. The wolves howled and the isle trembled. Sauron stood in the high tower wrapped in his black thought, but he smiled hearing her voice, for he knew that it was the daughter of Melian. Now a dark thought comes to the mind of Sauron, and he decides not to kill Lúthien but to capture her. The fame of the beauty of Lúthien and the wonder of her song had long gone forth from Doriath, and he thought to make her captive and hand her over to the power of Morgoth, for his reward would be great. Therefore he sent a wolf to the bridge, but Huan slew it silently. Still Sauron sent others one by one, and one by one Huan took them by the throat and slew them. Then Sauron sent Draugluin, a dread beast, old in evil, lord and sire of the werewolves of Angband. His might was great, and the battle of Huan and Draugluin was long and fierce. Yet at length Draugluin escaped, and fleeing back into the tower he died before Sauron's feet. As Draugluin is dying, he tells his master of Huan's presence upon the bridge. Right at that moment, Sauron realizes that he himself is the one who must take on this battle. Now Sauron knew well, as did all in that land, the fate that was decreed for the Hound of Valinor, and it came into his thought that he himself would accomplish it. Therefore he took upon himself the form of a werewolf and made himself the mightiest that had yet walked the world, and he came forth to win the passage of the bridge. So great was the horror of his approach that Huan leaped aside. Then Sauron sprang upon Lúthien, and swooned before the menace of the fell spirit in his eyes and the foul vapor of his breath. But even as he came falling, she cast a fold of her dark cloak before his eyes, and he stumbled, for a fleeting drowsiness came upon him. Then Huan sprang. There befell the battle of Huan and Lúthien Sauron, and the howls and baying echoed in the hills, and the watchers on the walls of Eret Wethrin across the valley heard it afar and were dismayed. But no wizardry nor spell, neither fang nor venom, nor devil's art nor beast strength could overthrow Huan of Valinor, and he took his foe by the throat and pinned him down. Then Sauron shifted shape from wolf to serpent and from monster to his own accustomed form, but he could not elude the grip of Huan without forsaking his body utterly. Ere his foul spirit left its dark house, Lúthien came to him and said that he should be stripped of his raiment of flesh, and his ghost be sent quaking back to Morgoth. There everlastingly the naked self shall endure the torment of his scorn, pierced by his eyes, unless thou yield to me the mastery of thy tower. With these words Sauron yields himself, forsaking to Lúthien the master of the isle and all that is there. Huan releases him, and immediately he takes the form of a vampire, great as a dark cloud across the moon, and he flees dripping blood from his throat upon the trees. At last he comes to Tower Nufuin and dwells there, filling it with horror. Then Lúthien, declaring her power, throws down the walls of the Tower of Sauron, and many thralls and captives come forth in wonder and dismay, shielding their eyes against the pale moonlight, for long they had lain in the darkness of Sauron. More than a century passes, and the host of the Valar reaches the shores of Beleriand, aiming to end the tyranny of Morgoth. For the next 42 years, the lands of Beleriand are destroyed in the War of Wrath, the culminating conflict of the First Age. If Sauron takes part in this devastating war, we are not told. The War of Wrath ends with the downfall of Morgoth and the destruction of the Thangorodrim. As Sauron perceives that his master is defeated, he repents for his evil deeds, but he fears the wrath of the Valar. When Thangorodrim was broken and Morgoth overthrown, Sauron put on his fair hue again and did obeisance to Eonwe the Herald of Manwë, and abjured all his evil deeds. And some hold that this was not at first falsely done, but that Sauron in truth repented, if only out of fear, being dismayed by the fall of Morgoth and the great wrath of the Lords of the West. But it was not within the power of Eonwe to pardon those of his own order, and he commanded Sauron to return to Aman and there receive the judgment of Manwë. Then Sauron was ashamed, and he was unwilling to return in humiliation, and to receive from the Valar a sentence it might be of long servitude in proof of his good faith, for under Morgoth his power had been great. Therefore when Eonwe departs, Sauron hides himself in Middle-earth, and he falls back into evil, for the bonds that his old master has laid upon him are very strong. But in after years he rose like a shadow of Morgoth and the ghost of his malice, and walked behind him on the same ruinous path down into the void. Soon the second age of Middle-earth draws on, and with it a new Dark Lord rises, one who through deceit and manipulation will attempt to dominate all of Middle-earth. This episode and the previous one we have released are of course only a part of Sauron's story. In the future you can expect more videos on the life of the second Dark Lord here on the channel. Thank you so much for watching. We'll see you in the next one on the Homely House. Namarie.